Yeah.
Hey guys, and welcome to my final movie review of the year. That's right, not necessarily the last film that came out in 2022 that I'm going to review, but definitely my last video of this entire year. And for those of you wondering why I didn't do a top 10, or not top 10, but top 5 albums of the year, I didn't listen to enough good stuff at all this year, and everything I was really looking forward to ended up disappointing me immensely. There's only like one album I truly loved and one I really liked, so that's out of the question. But I knew I had to get on here and talk about Babylon by Damien Chazelle, of course starring Margot, Robbie, Brad Pitt, Diego Calva, and so many others familiar faces that we see pop up throughout the narrative of this film. And look, let me just kind of explain my background with Damien Chazelle. Whiplash I first saw right before La La Land came out, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I thought it was one of the greatest, maybe the greatest psychological thrill I've ever seen. And of course, La La Land, when I first saw it in 2016, it was one of those movies I watched right at the right time in the right place while I was kind of getting this budding interest in film, and over time it just became one of my all-time favorite movies. I would throw that in top 5 movies of all time. So granted, I really love Damien Chazelle as a director based off of those 2 films alone. So when First Man came out, that was one of my most anticipated movies of that year, and I really liked it. But let's be honest, I think by the end it got a little boring. Probably the most standard thing that Damien Chazelle had done so far. He wasn't reinventing a genre like he was with La La Land or Whiplash. And so, granted, after that, I really wanted to see how Damien Chazelle would play his hand next. So, Babylon was my most anticipated film of 2022, by far, right from the beginning of the year. And so this was like the one that I would have gone to New York City if I had to see it, and it wasn't in wide release. But I lucked out in that sense, and it got a wide release right before Christmas. And so I headed to the theater and saw it, and it was great. I'm glad to say that, yes, I did love Babylon. Though, let's be honest, it is a very divisive film. And for some reason, I'm not really sure why. Well, I understand a little bit, but I'm not sure why the critics are so split on this and why this has a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. Because really, it is maybe technically the best film made this year, just from a proficiency standpoint. If we aren't talking about Avatar, if we aren't talking about how well everything works as a story, like in Everything Everywhere All at Once, I just think the directing is absolutely phenomenal. One of the best edited films. Once again, gotta give it up to Tom Cruise. He better get another Oscar nomination at the very least. If he won, I wouldn't even be upset. And I think, by far, the best shot film of the entire year. Yet again, Linus Sandrid coming in and really creating some of the most bright, vivid, saturated color palettes that we've seen in any movie this year. But just the way he moves the camera, once again, I mean, there isn't anything as crazy as that opening sequence in La La Land where they're all dancing on the freeway, but there's this one track where he kind of goes through this whole studio set, and you get introduced to the inner workings of what these people are doing on set, and just moving through all these set pieces like it's nothing. It really is incredible, the cinematography in this movie, and of course the wide, gorgeous shots that they get throughout this entire narrative. Really, more so landscape shots, I think, are the most impressive of these wides, but really it's captured so beautifully, and just this period of Hollywood is captured through the lens of the camera, and I really think that it is the best looking movie the entire year. Probably should win a production design Oscar as well. And Justin Horowitz, my goodness, probably the best score of the year. This man keeps popping off with these scores, and I mean, just give him another Oscar already. I really think that this score is definitely worth the accolade, and that's the thing. Just from top to bottom, this is such an extravagant production, and I absolutely loved all the trappings that kind of fell with that, because obviously this film is about, what do you know, the transition from the silent era over to the talkies. And look, we've seen that before, obviously, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I think the one thing that those films didn't touch on was just the absolute debauchery and hedonism going on in Hollywood at this very moment in time. My goodness, do they set this off right from the beginning when an elephant defecates all over some dude. So I think that sets it off right immediately what you're getting into. And I'll be honest, because they get in some gross stuff, and some of it I feel like you definitely could have left out of the movie. In other senses, I understand why it's in there, because really the whole first part of this movie is just this huge orgy party at this guy's house, and you get to see all of this going on at the time in Hollywood, which really is a well-documented sort of thing. And just seeing all of this kind of, like, all these drugs being taken and all this sex going on at this party, it really is decadence in the way that you would expect it, but maybe even a little bit more shockingly so. Like, there's no restraint at all with what's going on at this party, and you get introduced to the characters here, specifically that of Diego Luna and Margot Robbie and, of course, Brad Pitt. And I think that these three characters are what really will draw you into the narrative more than anything else in the film. Because as great as the filmmaking is, I mean, obviously it wouldn't, well, I don't want to say it wouldn't be anything without its cast, but it certainly helps. And Diego Calva, I mean, what a find. This guy is absolutely incredible. Has such a charisma on screen, a sort of restrained charisma. He plays a very interesting role in this movie, but he's essentially the character that we see this story through, the eyes of his character. And I think that he's absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, with his charisma, but also when the emotion really comes, he really steps up to the plate, especially by the end of this movie. I honestly think that this is an Oscar-worthy performance. I think he should get nominated. He might not, but I certainly wouldn't be upset if he did. One of the best debut performances of this year, I think, next to Gabrielle LaBelle in The Fabelmans. And of course, it goes without saying that Margot Robbie is terrific in this movie, as you'd expect, ever since she came on the scene with Wolf of Wall Street. But really, this stands up as one of her best performances with I, Tonya and Bombshell. She's absolutely killing this role. So much energy, so much charisma exuding from the screen, and just so much excess. She really is the definition of unhinged in this movie. But, you know, not in a way that it seems obnoxious or that you don't care about her character, because you really understand and sympathize with what she's going through, even if you don't agree with all the decisions she makes in this narrative. And Brad Pitt, he kind of plays the veteran actor who's already been established, as these two are trying to rise their own way in the industry. And he is awesome in this. I mean, it's not his best role, but I certainly do like the work Pitt has been putting in the past few years. And he does give a very, very good supporting turn here. I don't think he should be nominated for an Oscar or anything. It's not like anything like too crazily different from what he's done already, but I certainly think it is a noteworthy performance in his filmography overall. But though it's really these three you follow, you get some other characters showing up, one of which played by Jovan Adepo, who plays Sidney Palmer, who's kind of an integral character to this narrative. Though I feel like his character is kind of sidelined as compared to these other guys. And of course we got to talk about Lee Jun Lee as Lady Faye in this, and she plays a very interesting role, though I think she also is someone who's been underutilized. And that's the thing. I think you can tell from what I'm already saying, the narrative isn't necessarily the most consistent throughout. When it really hits, it really does. I mean, especially when they're talking about the filmmaking stuff, in the process of filmmaking, the problems that can arise during a shoot, and the hecticness that kind of circles around that. I mean, I can certainly relate to that. I've been on film sets, and I've been the one trying to bring everything together. But then those moments happen when everything just perfectly falls into place despite all this chaos and stress. And then something completely unintended and magical happens, and it is captured on film. And when this film was showing those moments, I was like, that is cinema. That is why we make movies. That is the magic of film. And I think it couldn't have been captured in a much more beautiful and sublime way than Chazelle captures it in those scenes. And just the filmmaking process, especially since this is about the transition from the silent era to the sound era of film, just when they're trying to like put a sound scene together for the first time, oh my goodness, that is like just as tense as almost anything in Whiplash, I swear. But it's absolutely hysterical in the best way possible. Really gotta love that stuff. And the sound design is really great too, and just the emphasis placed on certain sounds within a scene and how they would be heightening the character's emotion in that scene. Definitely should get a sound nomination at the Oscars as well. I think it absolutely deserves it. But as I was saying about that transition from the silent film era, this film is very similar to a lot of other films. It's like a mix of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Wolf of Wall Street, Singing in the Rain, and Boogie Nights. I know, quite a weird combo, but really I think it owes a lot of debt to those films, especially Singing in the Rain. I mean, they straight up steal shit from Singing in the Rain in this. And that to me is like, okay, like I get it, Damien Chazelle loves cinema. We already knew he loved Singing in the Rain if you saw La La Land. But if you want to make it any more obvious, just put on this movie and it will tell you everything you need to know. And that's fine, because I certainly understand why homage is so important in this case. And trying to set the template for what that film's talking about and contextualizing it within that era. I really do think that the film owes a lot to those films that came before. I do think it's better than The Artist, I will say, and I really like that film. But I think the thing that's so interesting and set it apart from those films, despite its similarities, is how it approached the topics and the certain sides in the film industry. Because really it showed how the ones kind of like in the background weren't the ones who left the film industry. It was really the ones in the limelight that got kicked to the curb, besides a select few like Chaplin, for instance. And you really get to see that perspective, I think, fully for the first time. And there's this great monologue in the middle of the film given by Jean Smart when she's talking to Brad Pitt's character. And it might be the emotional highlight of the entire movie. It was really such a riveting scene. And really what she has to say, you'd expect it to go one way. And then when you hear what she actually has to say, it's like, wow. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't want to spoil the scene. But you'll know what I mean once you get there. And she's really great in the movie, even though she isn't in a whole lot. Like that, for that scene particularly, I think she certainly leaves an impact on this entire narrative. And I really do love the smaller character moments between, let's say, Diego Calva and Margot Robbie near the beginning of this film. Because the first hour and a half of this movie is an absolute joyride and blast, seeing the filmmaking process, like I said, seeing these people's rises in the industry and how they go about it, and what's different, what's similar, because obviously Diego Calva's character is kind of more behind the scenes and Margot Robbie is the star, as you'd expect. But really, the debauchery in this film probably makes it the most insane movie of the entire year. I mean, there is so much in this movie that I was absolutely shocked by. Maybe I shouldn't have been shocked by it, but it certainly got a reaction out of me, a very guttural one at that. And of course, I mean, there's certain scenes though that I think go far beyond debauchery. And I think those are probably the most disturbing moments in the entire movie, especially the sequence with Tobey Maguire. Because Tobey Maguire is in this movie, and when he shows up, my goodness, the creepiest performance I've ever seen him give, even if he's only in the movie for a short amount of time. You certainly don't forget his character. But really, that whole sequence shows how dark and how far things can go in the underbelly of LA. And I think that's the scariest part about it, was this stuff was probably happening, and it is probably the most disturbing shit I've ever seen on film this year. Like, it really is kind of shocking to watch on screen. And I think that's where a lot of people are going to fall down on this movie. Either they're going to think it's too excessive, or they're going to find it too unfocused, and maybe that's why it's getting all these mixed reviews. But I still don't see how a few narrative flaws can bring down an overall a very, very strong film, because I completely love the filmmaking on display here from Damien Chazelle. You can tell this is a passion project for him, and maybe he is stroking his ego a little bit. Well, not to say he's an egotistical guy, but you know, like, he has the filmmaking chops, and he can kind of show that to us at this point in time. But I feel like maybe, though none of these characters have it, a little restraint would have been better for what he was doing from a directorial standpoint. That's all I can criticize with his direction in this movie, because I really think that this film could have been pared down just a little bit to kind of cut out some of the unnecessary subplots and narratives. But I really think the ending of this movie is going to split a lot of people, because I'll tell you, like, there was one point where I was on the verge of tears watching it, and then something happens, and I'm like, this is like the stupidest thing I've seen in a movie all year. And I don't know for the life of me, being such a great filmmaker that Damien Chazelle is, why he would choose to put that in the movie. But hey, it's there, and it's really stupid. So that's all I'm going to say on it. I really think it ruins the ending, and because I feel like the ending could have been so strong. Yeah, sure, it isn't like the end of Whiplash or La La Land, two of the greatest endings to any film, I would even argue. But I appreciate what he was going for, but I think he went too far in a couple of places. And I think that's what really brings this movie down from it being one of my absolute favorites of the year. But as it stands, I mean, this is certainly one of the best movies of the year, I would still argue. And I think another great addition into Damien Chazelle's filmography, though I do think it's going to be hard for him to top Whiplash or La La Land ever again. Like, can he? That is the question that people are going to be asking for years, and maybe he revealed his hand too early in that sense. But, you know, I mean, he's just starting out. I hope he doesn't get complacent or anything like that. And I think that this film really swings for the fences in the most audacious way possible. And not everything works 100%, but what does work really lands and hits like a truck, honestly. So with that being said, I'm going to give Babylon an 8.5 out of 10. Love this movie. I don't know if I'm going to rush out again to see it in theaters, but I'm really glad that it at least didn't disappoint, and I wasn't like, oh man, you know, so disappointed by a Damien Chazelle film. Even though First Man was really good. I mean, come on, it wasn't the two movies that came before it, and this certainly wasn't either, but I'm still glad that I absolutely loved it, and I really wish that critics were giving it a little bit better scores, because I get the divisiveness, but I don't think it should be that divisive, you know what I mean? But regardless, what did you guys think of Babylon? Do you fall on the negative side of things, or do you kind of agree with me that it's a great film, or do you kind of fall somewhere in between, or really like it but aren't quite there on loving the film? Let me know in the comments below, and of course smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Going to see a lot more movie reviews in 2023, but I just want to take a minute and thank you guys for joining me this entire year. I mean, the channel has grown exponentially, and I really appreciate you all watching my videos and having these discussions in the comments and what have you. Hopefully respectful conversations about film, and yeah, it's just so great that we could do this, and that I can finally do this and really enjoy the process of it. Sometimes it gets a little much, which is why I'm taking a bit more of a break in between videos this time around, but I wanted to get this out by the end of the year. And so yeah, guys, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the review, and I wish you guys a very happy new year. See you in 2023.